All right, as John mentioned in the open, we're headed to the Charm City. We looked that up, and it is, in fact, the nickname for Baltimore, so 5 points for John. The Preakness is this Saturday, the 150th renewal of the Preakness Stakes, and although we won't have the Derby winner, we do have a pretty solid field of 9 horses going postward for $2 million. Really looking forward to it. I mean, John, I know I made a joke about the shoddiness of Pimlico in the Open, and thankfully they're going to rebuild it. It's going to become something that people actually would realistically want to go to. But the Preakness has always been one of my favorite races, and I hate that it's kind of deteriorated in terms of quality over the years, and we can discuss a little bit about the Triple Crown spacing and whether that needs to change. I've come around on that, and just, I just think you have to get with the times eventually. But, I think this race, even without the Derby winner, is pretty worthy of the history of the Preakness. I mean, you got the undefeated Bob Baffert horse in Goal Oriented. You have the Derby favorite Journalism who's coming back. You got Sandman. You got a little international flavor. You got River Thames, who was second in the Fountain of Youth and third in the Bluegrass. And you got Clever again, who's a little bit of a wild card, who's 2 for 2 this year for Steve Asmussen. To me, this looks like a really competitive race.
It is. I think top to bottom, it's competitive. I think maybe you can knock out a couple of the local long shots that probably don't belong to be here, but it's certainly their right to pay the money and run in the Preakness and have the dream. I like what Britney said earlier about we have the Derby favorite in Journalism, and we have the people's favorite in Sandman running in this race, which is really cool. And, there's some good stories like Dwayne Lucas. Don't forget, he won this race last year with a long shot in Seize the Gray. And, you have Heart of Honor, who's coming all the way overseas and not just running in the race, but the trainer has employed his daughter, Safi, to run and ride this horse. And all she's done is ridden him the past couple of times, second to Galactic Star, and then second by a nose to Admire Daytona. Now, Admire Daytona didn't run well at all in the Derby. You can say maybe it was because of the slop, maybe because of the fact that they had the ship. It could be all those things, but it does that to me doesn't bode well for Heart of Honor. The fact that that its rival that it ran so close to in a photo finish and didn't show up for the Derby. I think it's also a big ask to have not only not a seasoned jockey, but a international jockey coming in and riding Heart of Honor. I think that's a big ask also, because I know there's a lot of fans and a lot of hoopla, in the various racetracks where this horse has run before. But I think it's a little different story when you get to the Triple Crown races, especially ones like the amount of people we're expecting to be here for the Preakness. I think River Thames, who was selected in our contest, is a sneaky horse also, coming off a really good, solid Bluegrass where he was, in the one hole and ran a solid third, just lost almost in a 3-horse photo. I think
he only lost by a neck to Sovereignty before that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, like you said, there's 5, 6, 7 horses you can make a legitimate case for in this race. If you cross out our last race and you cross out American Promise's last race, I think that there's a reason why American Promise was 7-1 in the Derby. There's a reason why we were 5.5-1 in the Derby. It's because we both belonged. And then Journalism, you can say he's a cut above because he's never been off the board, and last race was such an impressive race. But Joe, as a handicapper, are you worried about a bounce at this point? Because he gave it his all to finish second in the Preakness, and now it's 2 weeks. And at any stage of a horse's career, a 2-week turnaround is a quick turnaround. But to go from one grade 1 to the next, I mean, you tell me from a handicapping standpoint, does that concern you?
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly the horse to beat. Like, I don't think there's any doubt about that. He's 8-5 morning line. I think he might even be a little bit shorter by post time. But yeah, it's a weird thing to say, and it sounds like a homer thing to say that he's beat us by 11 lengths, but I would kind of rather have Sandman. It's the only reason I say that is because he ran so hard in the Derby, and Sandman really did it. He loped at the back of the pack. He made a little bit of a move on the far turn and then flattened out pretty quickly once they turned for home. So I only felt like we only really ran for a quarter of a mile.
3/8. Yeah, exactly.
Or 3/8 maybe in the Derby, whereas Journalism, I think, ran pretty hard from the 6 furlong pole to the wire. So I think that he has the more taxing effort to come back from. And I obviously think he's, reasonably and pretty far away the horse to beat, but yeah. And this is one thing I look for in handicapping these kind of races is like the trainer intention. Right. And Mike, I'm not, impugning Michael McCarthy. He's not going to run this horse at all if he thinks that he's like not ready to go, and same for the ownership as well. But just like the longer it takes in general for people to decide to run in this race, the kind of more wary I am of taking them, especially at a short price. But that's why I wanted to ask you, John, at the surprise call Saturday morning that Sandman was going to run, because the plan, as far as I knew, was to pass and wait until the Belmont. You talked to Mark without like giving away the farm here in terms of the inner discussions. Can you let the audience just in on what the mind's frame was going into this race now?
Absolutely, Joe. And I appreciate you asking that question. Our intentions for pretty much from the time we entered into the Derby until, the post-race examination of the horse was to skip the Preakness and possibly run him in the Belmont. And Tappets, as you know, are bred and have won, I think 6 sons of Tappet have won the Belmont. The extra distance, normally going 1.5 miles, he would relish. But a couple things happen. One is that they're doing construction on Belmont racetrack. So the Belmont is going to be the same distance as the Kentucky Derby, 1.25 miles. And the other is, and probably more importantly, is that the horse came out and was bucking and squealing and feeling phenomenal. And, Joe, we don't by nature, we don't run horses back in 2 weeks. That's just not what we do. Young horse, older horse, claimer, allowance, stake horse. That's just not our MO. So that goes to tell you just how fresh and good Sandman is feeling right now, where our intentions were always to give him 5 weeks and run him in the Belmont. And he came out of the race almost like he hadn't run. I mean, it was basically a 3 furlong, workout for him. And yeah, there's some emotional and mental taxing that goes on, but the horse mentally is such a good horse. If I didn't tell you he was a Tappet, you wouldn't know it. Like you wouldn't be like, oh, okay, well, he's a fruitcake, or he's just very laid back, almost to the point where like I noticed on Saturday when we were at the barn on Derby Day, when we were at the barn and we were about to do the walkover, he was like, dude, I don't want these people anymore. Like he was kind of hanging back in his stall and was happy, was like sleeping, standing up and was calm and everything like that. But for a horse that loves the limelight and loves to have people, loving him and be all over him and everything like that, he was like, I am so done. I am so ready to freaking put the saddle on and let me run. And then to only do it for like 3/8 of a mile, he's just jumping out of his skin. So that's behind the curtain as far as, why it happened. Mark called me this past Saturday morning, and we were talking about Sandman and some of the other horses. And he said, John, I'm looking at this horse, and there's an old adage that I live by, which is you run them when they're feeling strong. And I'm paraphrasing, but basically, he mentioned it in an interview this week as well, that when the horses are ready, that's when you run them, not when you think they're ready or when it's scheduled for the horse to run. He is still peaking as far as Mark is concerned. And that's the reason why we shifted gears. And it's a credit to the other owners for being willing to be nimble and pivoting, because it's not just a matter of, okay, we're going to run in the Preakness. We're actually basically saying we're going to bypass the Belmont now by running in the Preakness, and we're going to put money up. What people don't remember is that you still have to put up a pretty hefty entry fee to enter and start in the Preakness. So it's not just like, oh, it's a $500 entry fee, and we'll see where the cards. There's money at stake. There's a race that we're going to bypass basically because we're going in this Pimlico. And oh, by the way, this is like the most precious, valuable horse that we all own collectively and individually. He is the most important asset that we have in our racing stable. So we are not going to do anything that could potentially harm or hurt or have irreparable damage to the horse's career or physique. So the fact that people are like, oh, you're just doing it because you want on the pre, I could care less about going to Baltimore. Okay, personally. I love crab cake.
Charm City?
I can get them here in a restaurant that are just as good as in Charm City. So it's not a matter of that. I don't know if you realize, audience and Joe, who's audience member number one, as far as I'm concerned. But right now, the Stronach Group's not very happy with me. Okay, so to go into like enemy camp and have to run a horse or something like that, again, like that's not necessarily what Jon Green necessarily wants to do. So from a personal and a professional standpoint, the easy thing would be to bypass this, stick with the plan, and run in the Belmont. But it just, things lined up the right way. And most importantly, Joe, I'm begging you to hear this, is that the horse is feeling 1,000% good. Does that mean that he's going to run well on Saturday? Who knows? But he is ready to run.
Yeah. Well, and just to clarify, I love Baltimore. Nobody in Baltimore run up on me and asked me why the show was trashing the Charm City. That was my esteemed co-host solely. We're going to have to run a second disclaimer that says the opinions expressed are just those of John or just those of Joe. Going forward, one disclaimer isn't enough. We're going to need to differentiate even more. But no, like, I think the thing to drive home is that.
By the way, I love The Wire. Okay. Thanks. Sorry, go ahead.
The one thing everyone knows about Baltimore.
And it was fictional.
Can't wait to meet Omar.
Hey!
But yeah, the one thing I think that to drive home is that, like, first of all, the trainer lets the horse tell him what he wants to do. And then the owners in this case let the trainer tell us what he wants to do. Like, and I think that's one of the things that's a luxury for West Point and for DJ and for Vinny of having the caliber of trainers that we have. Like, there's no reason for us to meddle. No. I mean, that's not to say that we don't have input from time to time, but for a big decision like this, there's zero people on this side leaning on Mark Cassie to run. If anything, we would have preferred to run in the Belmont.
Right.
So it's not as if, like John's saying, like certainly wasn't owner directed, nor will any decisions pretty much on this horse be owner directed. But yeah, like, he's got to show up. And I flamed all the people last week for their gloating over Sandman losing in the Derby, and I hope we prove them all wrong on Saturday. He's got to show up and do it. He's going to get the right setup again. I think it's not going to be quite as fast a pace as the Derby, but I think there will be a good amount of speed. One thing to note is that John Velasquez is going to ride.
I ask you what your thoughts on that. Yeah.
So Jose Ortiz had a commitment to ride Clever again in the race, and so he's going to stick with that. I love Johnny V. Like, honestly, I would, if my life were on the line and someone was like, you got one jockey to ride one race to save your life, it'd be John Velasquez. And it's just because he's always in a good spot. Mm-hmm. He just has his horses in a good spot. So I'm jinxing it right now. I hope not. But you just so rarely see him get into like box and get into trouble. I'm like, wow, Johnny really screwed that ride. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just so rarely happens. And, I've been saying this from the jump. Like, I would love to see him a little bit closer. Sure. Like, I know we don't want to take him out of his tactics that he's been doing, but he had speed in his first two races. I don't want to see him 100 lengths out of it, but we got to play the cards. We got to see how the break goes and then how much speed goes out there. But if we're a dozen lengths back again, turning for home, like, I'm going to be pretty frustrated. I think one of the things that I loved about the Arkansas Derby was, we got the right setup, but Jose moved pretty early. Like, he was in front pretty much at the top of the stretch. It's not like he had to reel in some horse late just by the wire. He can have that early move and be in contention turning for home. To me, that's what I'd love to see. Is I don't want to see him too far back. I want to see him make a move and be in contention as they turn for home. Yep. And I think Johnny will do that.
And Joe, again to pull the curtain back so the audience can understand.
Some crazies out there. That's all I'll say.
Our intentions were to run Sandman in the Belmont, and we told Jose Ortiz we're not running in the Preakness. So go ahead and pick up another mount if you'd like. And he's undefeated on Clever again. I mean, he rightfully so. But once we announced that we were going to run in the Preakness, when I tell you that basically all the top riders or their agents reached out to one of us and said, "I would love to ride your horse," and I'm not saying that there were any of them that already had a mount that were like, hey, I'd be willing to spin, my horse to ride Sandman. To me, that gives me all kinds of confidence because they're handicapping the race also. And if they're basically begging off a horse that they're riding to ride us, or to ask to ride us, that is huge, 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 I say. So I appreciate the agents and the jockeys who, reached out to us once they found out that we were available. And I think that, we have a viable spot. I want to go back to one thing that you said, because I want to question it. At what scenario in your life do you anticipate that somebody has a gun to your head and says, you need to pick a jockey to win this race or we're going to shoot you? Is that something happened that came close to that scenario? I mean, that's kind of a little too specific, I think.
John, we're making a lot of enemies these days. I wouldn't put anything past any of the crybabies in this business. God forbid. But hey, some crazies out there. That's all I'll say.